Okay, hello, welcome to Making the Rounds, also known as, we're actually literally fucking making the rounds this time. We're gonna be going pretty hard on everything in the announcement, discussing implications, breaking things down, etc. on the new global format change, which is the biggest change probably since I would say the 2013 announcement, but I feel like there have been very significant changes to the global ecosystem, like when all of the other leagues franchised afterwards, right? So I think the franchising era was a very significant change. So arguably that era was as significant. But either way, we're gonna keep going. I have tried to break it down in more detail so we don't get completely lost in the sauce and then just go on drunken rants. Maybe that's just me, but we're we're gonna go ahead and talk briefly about what is broken down, and just correct me if I miss anything, Emily, because I'll probably miss something. But basically,
I probably will too. So it's a lot.
The top of the hour that probably most of our audience will care about is the consolidation of the LCS with CBLoL and kind of LLA, but as a joke, into the Americas, which is going to be two 18 franchise leagues that will be a conference-style system and will eventually have a basically consolidated playoffs at the end. And then we will have a guest promotion slot within the teams, which means two teams will be leaving the NA franchise league and 4 teams will be leaving the CBLoL franchise league. And we will also have one LLA team in each league. Okay. So we have that going. We also have the APAC changes, which consolidates the BCS, LJL, OPL, LMS. Am I missing one?
Yeah.
At LJL. I'm sorry if I missed you, but there's a lot. And I'm doing this
it's BCS, LJL. Yeah, BCS, LJL,
OPL,
LMS, and OPL.
Yeah. But consolidating those into, I guess, an 18 league, yes, and that will have a promotion relegation slot as well, or a guest slot, quote unquote. So that's fun, and those will be qualified for basically at the end of the year. And then after that, we basically have addition of one more tournament, moving to 3 splits, implementing fearless and unified formats globally. Yay! It's a lot. Did I miss anything? Are we good? I feel like LCO gets killed, or okay, it's not. It hasn't been called OPL in years. Correct.
It's LCO.
Oceania gets killed in some way every time one of these announcements come out.
So here's what I want to know, right? Because like this is totally a one-off. This is not important whatsoever, guys.
Yeah.
But with LCO players, does this mean they now have residency in APAC and in Americas?
So
like, does that mean that like they don't count as imports everywhere, or no?
That was changed at the beginning of 2023, or at the end of 2022. So that was basically
that was already the case.
Became APAC residents. But if you had previously played in NA, you could declare NA residency. So like King Ryoma, Fudge,
right.
FBI.
I totally missed that. So thank you.
Are all NA residents. But
yeah,
if you're a new OS player and you're like, my dream is to live in LA and have the parties, whatever, I don't know, and
great start.
Yeah, I actually haven't had anything to drink yet, but yet and do all of those things, then you're an APAC resident. Sucks. You take up an import slot, right? So that's kind of like the way it went. So yeah, that was already a thing. But anyway, I think I got everything. If I didn't get everything, we'll make it up. So I guess to start, there's also import rules and everything, but we'll get into that. to start, we'll start with impacts on the LCS ecosystem because this is an English language podcast, and I feel like most people who watch this will care the most about that. And then we'll kind of keep going from there. But I guess for you, like, what is sort of the most interesting or significant thing for LCS fans and teams?
I mean, like, I think the reactions I've seen on my timeline, because I followed Brazilian League of Legends since 2014, and I've been watching LCS since 2012, and everyone is mad, right? Because mainly over the for NA losing 2 more teams and then also losing spots at, like, guaranteed spots at international competition. And then obviously for CBLoL, a region that has been they're presented with a lot of, like, challenges to their league that NA has in terms of, like, socioeconomics, I guess. But they've established a really vibrant, like, healthy fan culture around that league, right? So I feel like from the NA side, it's like, how dare you? We've been actually competing pretty evenly with Europe in the past few years, and we lose a spot for it. And in Brazil, it's like, how dare you? You're taking all of this stuff that we built up organically because League of Legends is culturally relevant in Brazil more than League of Legends is culturally relevant in North America, right? As like a competitive sport. Because I know a lot of people also compare like server, like players on the server and stuff. And the biggest thing is like in NA, I'd say that the vast majority of people on the ladder are not going to go pro and don't have a lot of aspirations for pro. And you and I have talked so much about cultural relevance for League of Legends in North America and how like tier 2 and tier 3 keep getting gutted and gutted and gutted because of mistakes made in the distant past that just were never corrected. And so I'll say like the initial release, just like the upfront feelings from all sides is that it just feels bad, right? And I think Brazilian fans in particular are like very, very angry about it. And I absolutely understand why they feel like we did all this work and now like North America is kind of taking that away. And North American fans, where I think even if viewership doesn't necessarily reflect it from North American viewers, the sentiment towards teams and broadcast has improved over the past like year and a half. Are now kind of like, well, we were doing better internationally, so like, why are we being punished for this? And a lot of it just seems to be based on problems that have existed for years and were compounded with no, like, especially the stuff with NA, like NA infrastructure and making League of Legends culturally relevant in North America, like as a competitive thing. Like I still sometimes imagine a world where there had actually been outreach to like middle and high schools with donating like free PCs with League of Legends automatically installed, you know, to get people like automatically more involved in the game, that kind of thing, at schools and libraries. I know you yourself have done a lot of like, back when you were with EG, did outreach to schools and talked about how difficult it was to like even teachers who were on board, kind of teaching them how to talk to administration that didn't really understand about anything about competitive gaming. So yeah, I guess like the initial like visceral emotional reaction is still the thing that I'm like parsing through. But then in terms of competition, I mean, I guess if they wanted to have an NA Brazilian rivalry, Brazilian fans are pissed off. So you're going to get a lot of fan sentiment for Brazilian teams and hatred for LCS teams. So if you wanted that rivalry to start, I feel like the Brazilian fans are definitely already there for you based on this change just because they're that angry.
Brazil is like the anti-hero of the story, you know. They actually hate this, but they're like chosen by God to save the world. And
Ow.
okay, anyway. The world in this case being North America because I'm American and therefore America is the world. Yes. Moving on. Obviously that was a joke. But anyway, moving on, we are, I think, like specifically for the LCS ecosystem, I think that this ends up being in some ways a net positive because I think in terms of like viewership and generation of information, like by the end of spring, you'll in theory be able to point to higher viewership numbers, which I've been reading a lot about VC lately because that's what one does when one is unemployed. Read about VC markets. And a lot of the like long tail investment strategy is the idea is like, you know, we're going to lose some of these investments, right? But if something changes in the market, then there's like a reason to invest or a reason to look at it. It's like increased viewership. Obviously, VC is soured on us, and I think more VC is like a terrible, and more sponsorship money is like a terrible solution to everything, but it's a short run solution, right? So this is something that like organizations can say, look, our viewership has increased. It's a healthier league. We can specifically point to playoff viewership. This is the most hype event of the season. We get higher viewership, like demonstrably. If you look at the like average hours watched, average viewers, more people watch CBLoL. More people will watch NA playoffs in theory because it will be CBLoL NA America's playoffs. So I think this is a short run solution that provides more incentives for people to invest. Therefore, like NA will see this as a net gain. They will also see this as, okay, less revenue spread between teams because less teams are in. And I've talked about this, but I would really love to know the logistics of the guest spot and the LLA spot in terms of revenue share. I do not think that that has been made public yet. But my speculation, because the initial franchise buy-in was $10 million minimum, most teams paid more. If you were not in the ecosystem before franchising, you paid at least $13 million. If you bought in later, you probably paid more than $13 million. So that is one of those situations where, unless you're Shopify, then you paid like a bag of potato chips. But the point is that overall, the point is that like the existing franchise teams probably do not want to rev share with guest teams that get in via promotion. So I'm not exactly sure how that is going to work. And I would love to know how that is going to work because I assume the financial incentives for promotion are way lower than what you get if you're an existing franchise team. So would love to know that. But in general, like the pie in theory in that situation could be reduced to as low as 6 teams, right? Who are enjoying the bulk of the revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like an implication for NA teams and the ecosystem there, which is why you could see why NA teams agreed to it, you know. The other element of it is that like we will have 2 teams exiting, right? 2 teams exiting means that they will get some payout from Riot. A la EG and GG received some percentage payout. I don't know if the numbers were ever published. I know the numbers, but it was not 10 million. It was less than that. But they received some payouts from Riot Games. So they will receive that. So from that perspective, like the NA orgs benefit in theory from these projected changes. So there's that element. The next element is the part of the NA promotion. I know that you are excited about the NA promotion, so we'll start with that because that's positive and fun and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I just like the idea of having, because I know we were talking off camera, and I know you have your reasons why you're very skeptical of it, but I do like adding the promotion relegation element. I know later on we're going to talk about some things that are revitalizing or attempting to revitalize the NACL scene, right? And having people kind of enter at that level. But I think for me, franchising franchising as a whole, I was talking about this again off camera, but I'll bring it up here just because I think it's kind of funny. Before, when franchising was introduced, you and I were on a show with Travis and Mark at Yahoo Esports, and we talked about franchising and like how it works, and how it works in like traditional sports leagues in America, because it is a US is a system that was pretty much born in the United States. And I went through like a bunch of different charters, most specifically Major League Baseball. One, because I'm a baseball fan. Two, because it was the first franchise league in the US. And talked about like the benefits and the detractors. I'm like, my brain is not working. Basically, like positives and negatives about the system, right? And I think so much of this is literally about how can esports make money. Like if we are divorcing it from the idea that it is the largest marketing arm for the game League of Legends, and that it means that it now, instead of being a marketing arm, has to make money in and of itself as a league, as a sports league. How does that work? And franchising offers safety for existing orgs. That's how you're that's like the trade-off, right? Is that you're buying in to have like a lot of security. It also like radiating this idea outwards. A lot of people are like, why would we still have things in LA? Well, that's because all the franchises already set up here. And a lot of this is like, how hard do I want to go in on this? A lot of this is like fake basically like blowing up the idea that you're doing super super well to sell yourself to VC investors, right? And that's what a lot of the early like franchising system was. And obviously since then, many years down the road now, franchising has not proved a sustainable model because we don't have other revenue streams besides partnerships, really. And so you have all these people who initially invested, and they're just like, well, we're not getting ROI on our investments. What is going on? And the franchise system in North America led a lot of other leagues to franchise during that time, as you already covered, where we talked about how this was such a significant ecosystem shakeup, but it kind of happened in stages. And just earlier this year, we covered this on the show, the LCK teams were like, we're not making any money from franchising, guys. Like, what is going on? So in that regard, view this as I think there was even an article that came out in March that I know they keep citing as like the shift for how they're looking at esports globally overall as a whole, and how they're looking at revenue for those things. I think this definitely goes hand in hand with what that article talked about. We can maybe link it in the description. I have it up of this YouTube video, or I can link it in chat if people want to read it. This is the like super old article. If I don't get banned for putting a link.
Yep, go ahead.
But I think this like whether you like it or hate it, it is very much about money. Fewer teams existing means that you don't have to support as many teams if you're Riot. And that is what a lot of this restructuring is about, really. So ultimately, how this ties into promotion relegation is, I think it would be nice, and I feel like a lot of, and maybe this is just because your broadcast was so good, Kelsey, but also there are a lot of people that I know in from the North American side, that are really, really invested in, um, trying desperately against the rising tide of bad decisions that were made in the past to try and revitalize League of Legends competition in North America at a more grassroots level. Um, and that means tier one and it means amateur, even in spite of like obviously a lot of player retirements or players coming out and saying, I'm retiring after this season, etc. Um, and I'm hoping, my hope is that promotion relegation kind of helps with some of these teams that have helped revitalize at that level, like Disguised Toast obviously got a lot of interest just more recently. And I feel like we're probably going to cover these changes a little bit just separately, but like a few other people getting involved with teams, like Brandon Sanderson, the author, getting involved with Maryville. So like a lot of interest for North American League of Legends, I do think is kind of taking place at that level. So it would be interesting to see a promotion relegation in that regard. And I also, part of me, I feel like just dislikes franchising from a competitive level and likes promotion relegation better. I think both formats obviously have like positives and negatives. So this is probably my own personal bias, having experienced franchising for so long, seeing how it really doesn't work without an automatic geolocation buy-in like there is in traditional sports in the US, and also some sort of other revenue stream for traditional sports. Obviously, that's broadcasting rates. So yeah, that is why I'm like more excited about promotion relegation being added, just because I feel like part of it is just my own personal bias from seeing more of the negatives in my mind of franchising than the positives. That was a really long answer that covered way too much, and I'm sure no one cares.
No, it's great. I think to get into, there's a lot to unpack, so I'm just gonna pick one thing
Go.
to start. I think in terms of like your comment about the revenue models, obviously the broadcasting rights is a huge one, and I actually talked about this a lot on stream today because the new tradition of LPL is the second series starts and East Coasters wake up and come on my stream and talk about North America and ecosystem topics.
Ask you about North America. That makes sense, considering.
Yeah. So that was like a big thing today as we talked a lot about broadcasting rights. And that was something that there were several opportunities throughout the history of LCS that existed that were not capitalized on for various reasons that I said at one point my NDA with Riot will be up and I will leak. But they're very funny.
Countdown on that. Like, what do I have to set my watch to hear that?
But effectively the main thing is like, that's one thing, but another thing, and I've actually looked a lot into this, but sports venues and revenue generation from having like your sports venue, which is something that I think many esports have tried to emulate. Like LPL has sort of tried to do it. You have like China. Well, I already said LPL. You have Overwatch tried to do it, right? I think COD to an extent tried like sort of the venue model. But one big thing that people kind of miss in the venue model is effectively that in a lot of sports situations, by the way, we just met our sub goal. Thank you guys so much. Woo! The venue model is effectively the situation where sports teams like hoodwink city governments into building their venues, because there's been a lot of economic analysis on this, and effectively the venues don't actually add revenue or add GDP, but they do that. So the venues get created at no cost to the teams, is the TLDR, whereas you kind of have to build your own venues as an esports org. So but that's also an asset. So you have to think about it from that perspective. Is like you own this venue, and in theory you can sell it, but it's a sellable asset. So maybe it's worth more than a lot of other things that we spend money on, like player salaries. But it is something that you have to buy before it can generate you revenue, and that's why I think the current like LPL model is interesting, is because potentially it provides an opportunity for more games to be held at your venue and for that specific team to gain more revenue. But anyway, the point is that there's like all sorts of these revenue types, and I think the second highest one is basically ticket sales and at venue purchases, which are things that you're already coming in at a loss on in the esports ecosystem compared to the sports ecosystem. So there's a lot of things there that makes it like harder to do that from our side, because we haven't been able to translate these like esports revenue models or these sports revenue models into esports situations. I think we can try harder for sure, and I have a lot to say on that topic, but we don't want to spend all day here. So instead, what I'm going to say is, like, in terms of why I am skeptical of the NACL situation or promotion relegation, is I remember the last time NA had promotion relegation, and those rules were heavily abused. So I think this is something that's going to need to be regulated a lot. I remember Doublelift getting loaned so that Team Liquid didn't lose their LCS spots. I remember C9 farming multiple franchise spots, right? Right now, I would say FlyQuest Challengers is probably going to be the first place NACL team again. Does that mean they get the guest spot, right? And if it does mean they get the best guest spot, does FlyQuest get revenue by selling their spot, right? That's another question that you have to ask. And then in the situation where that doesn't happen, like, are we going to have teams is there going to be a new cash influx into NACL to try to get an LCS spot? That's, again, why the revenue logistics are very important to understand. How much are people going to value these spots? Because let me tell you, a lot of LCS teams are not making money. They're getting paid the minimum payouts. So it's not something that you can tell that NACL teams should be like super excited about, because right now it isn't like a super high value thing, is an LCS spot. But is there going to be an influx of investment, right? So that's the question. And if there is an influx in investment, what are they going to spend it on? Are they going to spend it on player salaries? Are they going to because right now there's already a sentiment in the tier 2 ecosystem in NA that younger players or less experienced players are a risk, because there is already promotion relegation in the tier 2 system between tier 3 and tier 2. Less experienced players are considered risks. If the value of an NACL spot goes up by proxy of the fact that you can now get an LCS spot, are they considered even more of a risk? And if that's the case, what needs to change to transform that? How frequently do rosters change? There's a lot of problems with payment. Like, one of the biggest issues is that NACL teams are kind of operated by hobbyists. Hobbyists with a little bit of money, who don't necessarily know how to manage a business. There have been several scandals of payments. I feel like it's basically public knowledge that Mirage still hasn't paid their salaries from Last Split. So there's been very recent public scandals about the problems in NACL. So the question is okay, we have a new influx of money. How are we spending it? Are we spending it responsibly, or are we spending it irresponsibly? Are we seeing newer players who might be more talented and doing poor scouting and not adding them to rosters? Are we just going for players who, have been in LCS before? Are we killing the development ecosystem in favor of trying to farm LCS spots? Are we trying to import? When I made a tweet about, NACL might decide they're going to spend an influx of cash on imports, I had multiple NACL people comment to me that it is not financially or not, I guess they didn't say financially, but it's not logistically or legally possible. In the past, NACL teams have been able to import. We can argue maybe that was not completely 100% legit, because often contracts and employment contracts at that time were not 100% legit. So I could buy that, right? Like maybe in the past that wasn't done on the like completely copacetically, right? So, but it is actually logistically extremely impossible. But you're adding a new factor to the equation, which is that one of the biggest things for that is barring the like visas is international recognition, right? International recognition is like the number one thing that gets underlined. I know this because I've seen multiple visa rejection forms now for RAP King. But international recognition is a big factor, right? So if you have someone like partnering with an NACL team because of either an influx of cash or because, okay, suddenly there's an LCS spot, and LCS is an internationally recognized product, right? It's like, okay, this NACL spot could land me an LCS spot, which means that this is an internationally recognized competition.
Yeah.
Or I have Brian Sanderson, who is an internationally recognized figure, might not know anything about League, is telling me that this player is of international merited recognition. Like, all of these things do have some legal merit or value, right? So I think that it's worth noting that these can change. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not 100% up on the legal logistics, but when you tell me it is impossible, I look at history. I look at what I know of these processes because I have experienced them. I've been with LCS teams, and what is underlined in the processes change. Things change. Things factor in. It will be a different game at this point. So, yeah, I think that someone in chat is asking who Brian Sanderson is.
Sando. Yes, Brandon Sanderson. I just like saying Brando Sando.
Brando Sando. He's a fantasy fiction author, and you're asking me, but Kelsey, it doesn't make any sense. Why would a fantasy fiction author writing a letter about an LCS player work? Because a lot of it is based on the whims of your immigration agent, and if your immigration agent is a Brian Sanderson fan, they'll be like, oh, Brian Sanderson thinks this guy is good. Okay, he can get in the country. So, Brandon,
I mean, for something else, for something else that supports that, I think,
yeah,
I don't mind saying this publicly. I know I've talked to you about it, but like, I had players, a few Korean players ask me if they could use, specifically when I was at ESPN, because ESPN is an internationally recognized publication. They'd be like, can I use your article that you wrote that appeared on like ESPN.com about me as part of my visa paperwork? Because that would be something that an agent would look at and be like, oh, you're recognized enough that you were published in ESPN, right? And that was something that like meant something to a visa agent that was potentially processing a player like from South Korea who's trying to play in the US.
Yeah. So for me, like, because I know the people operating a lot of the NACL orgs, I know the decisions could change. And you say, but maybe this means because there's value to be had that more intelligent people will come in and operate NACL orgs. And to that I say, I also know who operates LCS orgs. So, okay. Anyway, moving on. So, yeah. Anything else we want to say about LCS? I think it is net positive for the LCS orgs who will remain. It is net positive for the LCS orgs who will leave. And it is potentially net positive for NACL. And I will agree. I think it's like positive overall for the hopes and dreams of players who would otherwise quit the game. So all of these things, I still heavily advocate for like CBLoL NACL just merging with CBLoL straight up. Like honestly, I still heavily advocate for that. But if they want to keep NACL alive, they do have to fundamentally change the product, and I think this does that. So there's that.
Surprised that they haven't just merged them completely, especially with like, again, a lot of the funding I've seen recently towards like any sort of investment. And this is again is reflected through some of the partnerships that were made, like the Brendan Sanderson one that I mentioned with Maryville. A lot of that investment, and I've talked about this before, has come at the collegiate level. So the fact that it is still separate is like very bizarre, especially when you do have a bunch of collegiate directors talking about how it's like a weird balancing act to talk to their administrations, because in a way going up against another collegiate team means more to administrators, even if that team is awful, than saying we're going up against like the top NACL team of FlyQuest Challenger, just because college administrators don't see it that way. But still, most of the investment, a lot of the investment in NA tier 2 over the past year, I feel like has been made at the collegiate level. So maybe that's why they're not merging them yet, but I think that would also probably help.
Yeah, I mean, I think for collegiate, the other element is like if we are talking about imports, they obviously have a very clear advantage in importing players. So the collegiate teams entering NACL, we have like the weird WinU SLU partnership, and then we have Maryville. So we have those things. They have like a clear advantage. So if we are talking about like NACL orgs see that imports is their way to join LCS, then you already have like CBLoL with an advantage because they can import very easily. So yeah, there's that advantage. I think that is pretty much it though. Yeah, let's talk more about CBLoL. Woo! Love it. Great. I did want to ask you because you probably have a better chance of knowing this, but obviously the broadcast is healthy, I think, based on my understanding. But how are the teams financially? Do you have any insight on like the general health of CBLoL teams financially?
That I don't. I know back when I covered it a lot more regularly, it was essentially not great, save the top like few teams. Most specifically at that point in time, because I think it was like 2016, it was Pain Gaming and Cade. But obviously, I think the biggest thing that's happened as an outsider from watching CBLoL is obviously the broadcast is super healthy, the fan culture is super healthy, and a lot of the stuff they've done, and I don't know if this is just a reflection of who I follow on Twitter and like how I try to kind of pay attention to CBLOL whenever I can, even though I don't have time to watch it anymore. Slash, I am typically on like prepping for our broadcast while it's happening. Is that it seems to be the participation in like their academy system and overall like the teams themselves seems to be really, really strong. As for financials, I do not know. I would make an assumption that like it's pretty similar to most other franchised leagues. But I like can't say that definitively. I'm just making an assumption based on like how well slash poorly the franchise system has worked like across all leagues. So unless someone, maybe since Chaka just joined chat, maybe he knows better than I do about like the financial health of some of these orgs, but I would make a similar assumption. And again, this is based on an incredibly outside perspective, that the top teams are doing all right, but the rest of the league is probably not making money. And again, that's not like slamming CBLOL teams. It's that like no one is making money. So
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for them, and I think the reason why they're rightfully really frustrated with this change is that a lot of this stuff was done in a very organic way that ties into Brazilian fan culture as a whole. And I think it was done like very intelligently, and a lot of fans feel like we built this by ourselves, right? Through no help of anyone else. Um, and now we are being like essentially punished because NA needs viewership and NA needs like fans. I do think that again, I don't think there was a super rivalry between NA and CBLoL before, but now CBLoL fans have every reason to just despise LCS, which means that the playoff system is going to be pretty heated. So I'm really looking forward to the competition there because that's going to be pretty fun. But like the big thing with CBLoL is you question. Yeah, Shaka says, okay, I assume Loud and Pain have been doing relatively well. That kind of tracks, right? With like, okay, top teams are doing well, everyone else is kind of struggling. Also, Tenebrous Gallant, I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I'm so sorry. Why the fuck are we doing any of this? No one anywhere is making money, not just esports. You try to tell executives that I internally have actually brought this up in meetings where I'm like, how do I talk to people higher up about how esports as a whole is like the best marketing arm you have and shouldn't have to be independently profitable? And like, there's no answer, which I've already brought up on the show before. But I think the big question for me for CBLoL is, with being able to play NA teams in this playoff, will it help at all in terms of like bringing them up through competition? Because CBLoL is in a weird spot where whenever I watch some of their players, I'm like, some of these players, especially the ones who rise to the top teams, are like really mechanically gifted. But the macro of CBLoL teams, not that NA's macro is like the best in the world or anything, but I do think there are some things that they could learn. And so if there is any one sliver of benefit, it could be from top teams maybe being able to play NA teams a little bit more frequently. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I said this before, but it's like, and we talked about this extensively on a previous episode, which is that there are ways to measure the marketing impact of esports on overall revenue, right? And Riot says their public take is that they can't measure it, which is very different from the other two options, which is that they don't know how, or they can measure it and it's losing money and they don't want to make that public knowledge. Considering what I know about Riot, I'm going to assume the first, but like the second can be true. So that's like a big thing, is that I would prefer that they would be able to measure like effectively the marketing impact on like skin sales, things like that, and be able to at least share that information with teams. I've had people say, but the problem is that if you share that information with teams will want some of that. It's like, well, unless it's in their contractual franchising agreement, they're out of luck, aren't they? So that's one of those situations that's a little bit tricky. But I think that's like a really big thing to discuss as well, is like, okay, if you are not counting that, then you have to accept that esports is losing money and you're basically subsidizing it with the game itself. And if that's the case, then I understand why Riot are making all of the cuts and all of the changes and downsizing everything. I think one take to have is that none of this would have mattered if they hadn't spent a shit ton of money early on. And again, this is like a product of the VC model where if you're spending money and you're giving the appearance of spending money and growing, VCs expect for a certain amount of their investments to be losses. They don't care as long as you give the appearance of growth. They don't do very deep research as to what is a good investment, and they will throw money at you. So, that's kind of like, and then of course they kept spending money to further that proof or further that model, and now we're here. The fact that now we are having to downsize is more of the issue, right? I think that all of these ideas were great as like opening things, and I think at least I've seen a few people make the point that before that if esports previously had like a more organic league, esports previously had like a more organic tournament international structure, that then Riot said no, we can do better. And I think that that's like one of the bigger issues that's kind of like a lot of people pointed out at the very beginning that that's hard to do, right? So we'll see, I guess. But for CBLoL, I think for me, obviously, the writing was on the wall for a while. Most people had the idea that like this would be a way to save it, just because like on paper the viewership metrics could save NA, which we already talked about. So this is something that is likely to happen. I think CBLoL is in a position where the broadcast product in theory is making money, but the teams, I would be surprised if the teams are making money. The biggest concern I think for CBLoL fans is that now teams will have to compete at higher price points for players, right? There's more free flowing import. Like the import restrictions, for those of you who don't know, is if you're in the North Conference, you can have 2 imports from any region and 1 import from Americas broadly, so LLA or CBLoL. And if you're in the South Conference, the same. So the idea is now we're going to have to compete on a higher financial level. I think that's less of an issue because I think LCS teams are going to be spending less, but I don't know, again, the exact financials. And again, I know that teams are, even though in theory, like, you could take like a Tinones and you could have a massive Brazilian fan base in LCS, I think teams would still rather just take a random Korean from the ladder. So we'll see. That's definitely a thing that's like definitely a we'll see in terms of predictions of what's going to happen. But
yeah,
I think the other positive is just maybe it's like exciting and easy to broadcast, and this is like a very obvious rivalry that will be able to capitalize on from a viewership standpoint and a storytelling standpoint, and like really hit it home, and it'll be good for both products. Because I do love the idea, now that you've brought it up, of CBLOL fans and players hating us. And
yeah, no, it's already there. It's happening.
No. I know that they do, but I do like the idea that you brought it up of like that making the rivalry very exciting and fun.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something that maybe can be a net benefit for both conferences, quote unquote. But in general, I think this kind of feels like when you're sacrificing something that's doing really, really well, or someone who's doing really like CBLOL almost feels like the second child that was born to be an organ donor for the sickly child.
Oh my god.
Sorry.
Oh, what an analogy. No, it works. It works.
And,
but like, wow, we suddenly got very dark here.
So it's and then like they're having to sacrifice their life. Like they can't go out and play like a normal kid because they have this sickly sister that they have to provide organs for. And go through multiple surgeries. But anyway, I think yeah.
Oh my god, I'm dying.
That's probably how it feels right now. But
yeah, no. I mean,
in the end, it will be something that can be a narrative positive, at least.
I hope that at least. But yeah, it's I think the other thing is also that obviously, and maybe this can dovetail into talking about LLA. is that like LLA got completely gutted essentially, and
Yeah.
the other thing that feels really bad for Brazil obviously is that they're losing 4 teams.
Yep.
Whereas LCS is only losing 2, because presumably because they already lost 2 previously. So but yeah, like on the back end of this is the fact that LLA is just kind of getting subsumed into both like conferences. And I think again, like, you know how before I said like I imagine a world where we'd done outreach in 2011 and 2012 to like middle schools and donated free PCs with like League of Legends on them. I also imagine a world where like some of the LLA, specifically Mexico, was already a part of the LCS ecosystem.
Yep.
But that aside, I think obviously that kind of is and like this also ties into what's going on with APAC as well, which fewer people have talked about, and I assume it's just because most of my Twitter feed and kind of like people I talk to are typically probably LCS fans, or CBLoL fans, but like the combination of what's going on with APAC and then LLA getting subsumed essentially means like the absolute reversal of what happened when Riot was like, we're not going to have the GPL anymore. We're going to have LMS. We're going
Yep.
to have like separate leagues for every single one of these. And that is another good point. It's also 4 to 6 a.m. in the APAC region. But like, yeah, the APAC is, they had, so LLA has their entire thing essentially nuked outside of a few teams joining the conferences here for Americas. And then APAC is contracting all of these smaller regions. Specifically, the biggest one, I think, is VCS, which obviously we already talked about how we weren't sure about the impact of what happened with VCS this past split and how that was going to affect like
Yeah.
the overall league. And I guess the answer is that they're just being subsumed into this new APAC region, despite being a really massive server with a lot of talented players. They obviously had a lot of funding issues, and like part of the, again, I'm not defending match fixing, but like it was very obvious why it happened given how low player salaries were, right? And so I think that is the other big thing coming out of this change is like, again, if you're looking at this as something where this is a monetary change, removing this large of an amount of teams is going to affect how many teams they need to give money to slash make sure are like receiving a stipend, right? So that is a massive part of it, and it sucks. It sucks especially to look at what's going on with APAC from my perspective, as someone who really enjoyed watching some of these teams, especially at international competition. So that's I think the other thing that I've seen fewer people talking about, but yeah.
I think yeah, the APAC thing, I think since you want to move on to that point, we will, and I will sort of squash my CBLoL point. But one thing I will say in terms of, because this applies to like everything, is if we are reducing the size of every league, that probably means that most teams in most leagues are not profitable and are willing to take a payout for franchising. But Riot doesn't want to pay out every single team and just kill the leagues. So, I mean, so they're trying to keep the leagues alive. It's also like a lot of teams will probably want to try because it is, they will get less money at this point for a payout than they initially paid in for it, pretty much universally. So I think that means that some teams will accept payouts, and to the point of like many people in chat, there's no reason for CBLoL to downsize other than for the uniformness of size, right? Unless CBLoL teams also, some CBLoL teams are also wanting out, right? So that is my assumption, and obviously like fans are sad because less teams, less opportunities. Players are sad because less teams, less opportunities. But remaining orgs and orgs that get out, like in theory, are both benefiting from this to an extent because they don't want to be here or they want more of the pie, which in theory right now there is not really a pie and you're getting minimum, but so it doesn't change that much. But either way, you know, like it's I would assume that at least some of the CBLoL teams want out of the situation if they're also downsizing. If not, then I don't know, Riot's just making arbitrary decisions. So
one interesting thing from ZoeBot in chat is the biggest talk on the CBLoL side right now is how this change came right as the franchise contracts ended. So
okay.
That's another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. So I think that that's something, and I assume that that also applies to APAC, to bring us back to that transition. So yeah, and we briefly touched on LLA, but I think the best solution for LA would have been to just let them be America's region residency and not restrict them as LLA residency with 2 teams. But I don't know. Every time I hear about financials in that league, it's just not sustainable remotely, and no one's making money. So I don't know. From a monetary perspective, I just wish that because they're like, again, to your point, like if we had incorporated Mexico or LATAM into like North America before, then we could have maybe seen like players like Saya in the LCS at one point.
I'm like still forever mad about Saya, I think, but that's just my own personal bias.
So yeah, I think it would be more positive because very few teams will want to hire LLA players anyway. I think it would be positive to allow them to have America's residency on top of getting fucked. So yeah, that's the TLDR there. But anyway, back to APAC. Woo! The most interesting thing to me about the APAC situation is it's like we're going all the way back to GPL, to your point.
Yep.
But even GPL guaranteed at least some representation for every mini team. One of my first esports jobs, fun fact, was to do all the match tickers for the sub leagues of the GPL. So I would do like the Philippines match ticker, and I would go to Gosu Gamers, and I would put in the scores at the end of their game to do that. So I would track like the Philippines league and the Thai league and all of these little mini leagues. And they were all like the winners of those mini leagues were all guaranteed a GPL seed, right? And usually they would just get trounced by the what are now called LMS teams. I think at the time they were LNL, whatever. But they would always get trounced by the LMS teams from like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, whatever, that region. And now now it seems like we're just going to take the top 8 teams out of the huge PCS playoff thing. We're going to throw them in as the main league, and then everyone else can be in these little sub leagues and maybe get an opportunity to join as a guest team later. So like OPL, VCS is counted in that. You have the LMS. I mean, we listed that before, but LJL also is now. LJL I think was never part of the GPL before, but I don't know for sure. But anyway, that was.
I don't think they were because it started as a super grassroots thing in Akihabara, and then
they played on the NA server. That was a fun time.
Yeah, yeah, and it was literally like in a like people joke about like Freak's basement for season 1. It was literally in a tiny studio in Akihabara, and it was like almost completely fan.
Yep.
And like player driven until the official like creation of the LJL as like a world's qualifying region.
Yeah, and I remember LJL was actually created running on the NA server before the Japanese server.
They didn't have their own server.
But yeah, very interesting that we're kind of going back to that, and I understand why APAC fans are upset, right? Like that's really upsetting, and I understand like OPL gets screwed over every single like to the point.
Oh, right? Like leave Oceania alone.
Oceania gets screwed over every time.
Oh my god.
Like Andre Firemaster made a joke though, like in chat earlier that
I love Andre.
They're the Kenny of
of
no! Oh my god, you killed Kenny again every episode. So yeah,
that's a good one, Andre.
Yeah. So I think that that's a little unfortunate. But then you also have like the VCS situation, which is super upsetting, and you have the understanding that they're very much probably going to have a hard time. So it's, you get the sense that the split is probably going to be like, I would guess like 6 LMS teams and 2 like VCS teams. Maybe there'll be an LGL team. LGL did really well, but who knows? So I think the split is going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. Like my biggest interest is again like how the rev share models are going to work, how these things are going to work in general, which I think, not to out Mr. Woobly, he's a great guy. I don't want anyone to attack him or anything, but they made a point where they made a post in the NICL server, which I'm still in, and he'll probably kick me after I say this publicly. But
please.
He made a post that said, he made a post that said like, we're still not ready to discuss details, right? Which tells me that this is not, like the logistics are not completely finalized on how this is going to work. So I'm very interested to see how that will pan out, right? Because it's also a bit concerning that the logistics are not completely finalized, which means this is like a for sure. There was someone at EG who always made the comment, we're building the plane as we're flying it. And I was like, is that a good thing? Like, is that what we want to be doing? So yeah, good times.
Hey, Rafa. Yeah, I mean, I think there is, from my perspective, so much that I still don't know about how this is going to work. I just think it's really like, for someone, like the thing that people have to understand, I think, about both of our perspectives is that we've both been here for so long that, to me, part of me is like very I guess like bitterly amused by how we're just going back to like a worse version of GPL.
Yeah.
And I say that with like actually a lot of frustration, just because I think, again, the amount of time and effort that people have kind of given to this game in these respective regions isn't something that deserves to be kind of tossed aside like this. And even understanding like why it's happening, it's still really sad, and also just kind of humorous considering back then it was like, no, this thing is going to blow up. We need to make sure that everyone has their own qualifying region and their own separate broadcasts and stuff like that. And I don't know if this is now, just because I have a hard out at 2, a transition into the international tournament that we haven't talked about yet. It's like, there's only so much speculation, guys, that the two of us can do on like what teams are in and out. Like, I have no fucking idea. I don't know how this is going to be set up. I have no inside information. I'm
happy to speculate on which.
Yeah, I mean, we can, and we can do that in a future episode. But actually, I do have a hard out at 2.
We can talk about international competitions. We want to talk about FPX.
We like this completely has eaten into the FPX drama hour, guys. And also talking about how anyone's legend are killing it. But yeah, I think all of my notes to Kelsey have been like, oh man, we have to talk about anyone's legend. Oh man, we have to talk about FPX, and then this drops. I think the big thing is that we now have a third international tournament with Fearless draft ? And I'm curious because I feel like I'm curious to get your perspective on this because I feel like the two of us have talked a bit about Fearless draft before.
Yeah.
From our experience with NACL, watching NACL, and how it worked there.
LDL
and
to
then
an
obviously,
extent. That one was like wild. That was true fearless.
Yeah.
That's what NACL will be. Woo! Let's go.
Yeah. We haven't even had time to talk about the NACL changes. Sorry guys, I was sick last week, which is why we didn't have an episode. But yeah, looking at what this tournament's going to be, I'm also very confused, but it's like Fearless is so weird to me. Part of me, the super old bias, like old analyst in me, we've talked about this and we've talked about Fearless more broadly, is still like, I don't think forced champion diversity is necessarily the way, and or it's a loose band-aid over other problems with how the game has grown stagnant. Like, I think two things can be true. I think it can be true that players don't always play things that are really strong just because they either don't want to, or they find it too boring, or they don't want to learn it. I think that can be true simultaneously with the game itself being having issues with maintaining regular season viewership because the game itself fundamentally has not changed. And so one of the ways to make it seem like it's changed is more forced champion diversity. So that being said, like, all in my head, I think this tournament is weird to me only because that they're like, Fearless draft is the selling point, which is what a lot of people have been like really interested by, I think, with LPL. But then also, like, from a fan perspective, I've seen people really liking Fearless. From an analytical perspective, from old curmudgeons like me, I've seen people like it less and or think it's kind of an artificial way of changing the game. But that aside, if it's just one team per like region, that is also really bizarre to me because then it brings back, and you were in Tallahassee for this. I was only watching from the outside, but you were actually on the ground floor in Tallahassee, Florida for the first MSI, where everyone was flying in from like just having completed their finals. Like, I remember T1 were like super jet lagged for that entire tournament, or at least for the first few days. And having one team per region brings back a lot of the structural changes that we are now just starting to see kind of get eradicated by the new MSI format and the new Worlds format. And another thing I would bring up regarding Fearless, so like, first of all, I have no idea how that tournament's going to work if it's just one representative, because we're bringing back a lot of problems that we had previously with the existing MSI, like the prior MSI format. But then also, we didn't have Fearless draft for this MSI, and people were like, it's the best tournament ever, because we still had teams like, especially when Gen.G and BLG played, two of the best teams in the world trying to find answers for each other specifically based on their prior matchup. And without Fearless, that was still super fucking interesting. So anyway, that's my rant about that, which I guess it probably just sounds like old woman yelling at cloud. But that's a way of saying, like, I have no idea. I'm still all for more international competition. I just have no idea why or how it's going to work with only one representative per region. And then also, I find it really interesting that Fearless has become like the big selling point for saying that something is going to be interesting, when we just had a tournament without Fearless that people were calling one of the best international tournaments we've had, and certainly the best MSI that we've had.
So I had this conversation about Fearless because I've now co-streamed a split of NACL with Soft Fearless. I've watched like some of the LDL Hard Fearless or True Fearless, I guess is what Weebly's calling it, which is going to be this split, and I will co-stream NACL again. I've decided I will do it. Yay! Woo! We'll be co-streaming NACL on this channel still. But that'll be an interesting one to watch. But my feeling for some of the biggest complaints with like the one team Fearless or the we're banning only the champs you've picked in the previous game is that it feels like it actually restricts freedom more because teams feel more incentivized to pick the champion that the previous team just played. To, I don't know, either get a chance to play it or because it's OP, one of those. So you get a lot of draft swapping. And that almost feels like more stagnant. And I think looking at the LPL data from the first weeks, that's just not true. It's not more stagnant. There are actually more picks. But I remember in 2015, I wrote an article because Waylon Rizal made the statement at the end of 2015, which was the completely tragic GP Mordekaiser Worlds, made a statement that it was the most diverse worlds ever. And I did an analysis at the end of that was like pretty data heavy. It was like probably the most data heavy article I've ever done for League. And it was, well, actually, if you look at these different metrics, which is like champions picked per game, unique champions picked per game, unique champions picked as a percentage of champions that are possible to pick because more champions have been introduced, all these things. It's actually like only the second least diverse worlds. At the time, there were only 5, right? So like all of these things, like picking more champions and sometimes one-off picking champions doesn't necessarily make your meta more diverse, right? That's the big thing. I think it's a selling point as a cool marketing tool, and I'm not going to completely shit on it, right? But I also think it doesn't necessarily automatically equate to more champion diversity. What I will say is I think the format of like the new little international tournament being only 5 teams and being soft fearless makes it a test run of what it could be. It also makes it small. It also makes it less of a cost and less of a monetary investment. All of those things, in my opinion, are great because what can you do with things like that? You can scale them up. What if we had to do for the past however many years with tournament formats and investments and all these things where I'd have wanted to do? We've had to scale them down. So having something small that's interesting and fun as like a test run for more international events that can be scaled up because it is so small, I think is good and positive. And I like the new international tournament. I think it'll be fun and interesting. I also like the exclusive club of like the one team from each region. Unfortunately, there are far fewer regions, so it feels even more sad. But I think that's more for me the problem with it is just that there will be fewer regions. So basically, this will be the marquee event that kind of acknowledges that we just killed so many regions. But in general, I like the idea of it. I think it's a win. I am down for the new international tournament, so yeah.
I think so. I still want more international tournaments with all the caveats I said. I did not think about the scaling up versus scaling down, so I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually something that I was not thinking of whatsoever. I also think, and we definitely don't have time to get into this on this show, but another thing I will be super curious about is looking at how this 3-split is these new 3-split system is going to be applied to LPL and LCK. Obviously, this year we already had LPL trying out a new format for summer where they've separated everything into conferences and are going through their like fearless mode now into another stage down the road. I think the big thing that everyone is kind of looking at from an LCK perspective is how is this going to affect the way that our system is run, right? Because right now I think people really enjoy the LCK format. I'm pretty sure that even with the letter that LCK had at the beginning of the year from team owners, LCK viewership has never been better in the history of the league. So that'll be really interesting from my perspective to see what they end up doing and how they might have to now change their format to fit the 3-split schedule. Because LEC is already on it. I'm curious to see what they'll do with like LCS and Americas and what that will look like with like the added playoff. But then I assume LCK is super interesting just because they used to have a 3-tournament format before, all the way back when OGN ran champions. And so I'm really curious to see how that ends up shaking out and what they do with that format or whether it will change.
Also, I forgot to do this, but I promised chat that I would summarize your point because the last time you spoke, there was an ad block of quite a bit. So I'm basically going to summarize your point, which is that, and you could correct me on this, but which is that you think that Fearless is like a band-aid, a little bit fake. You felt that the MSI was very successful without Fearless and that people were very excited and it didn't need Fearless, so you question like the inclusion of Fearless on the new tournament. You also didn't really like as much like the few teams that like only having the 5 teams. And then I think you also mentioned that you felt that like the squashed schedule would be an issue, and it was like kind of going back to old MSI, which was like janky and Tallahassee, Florida. So, is there anything I missed? Or
that is
you wanna
no, that's a pretty good summary. It was basically like, even though I don't like despise Fearless, I think that it's interesting. It's just interesting that that's become the marketing point because, I again, we just had a tournament that people are calling the best of its ilk in terms of it's the best MSI we ever had. We still had really, really interesting matches, and I'd argue that a lot of that came from draft adaptations specifically between BLG and Gen G from the first time I played to the next. And like draft itself has a like to add on to my thoughts of Fearless, draft itself has a narrative part of a series, right? It becomes really, really interesting when you're talking about players and matchups as a series goes on, especially if teams are facing each other multiple times in a double elimination tournament like BLG and Gen G were. And that entire thing did not need Fearless, right? It was still those two teams still made some really interesting draft adaptations based on what their players could play. So that is the thing I would
I mean, I think
bring up
for the LPL format. I think this format is almost like a gradual downsizing because there are technically fewer games going to like the group A, group B format system. And then the double round robin BO3, I think you calculate the number of series and it does end up being less. I think you could even reduce it to a single round robin BO3 is like a very easy way. Arguably, a lot of teams would be annoyed because being placed in the Group B conference makes your life really hard and immediately drops the average viewership you get. And the trade-off is that you get the viewership when you're playing the top teams in the conference system. The LPL is in a very funny spot where the teams with high fan bases historically are the bottom teams.
I was going to say.
It's, in theory, that would be like how it would work. The other element of it is, in terms of like the LPL standpoint, is when we talk about teams struggling financially, like a lot of teams, even in LPL, which you would considerably historically think of as like some of the most financially successful orgs with like their merchandising exploits and things like this, they for sure have had to downsize with the recent issues as well. They're definitely looking at ways, like with the recent format change, of inflating viewership, of making back money on some of the teams that had to shell out for venues and all of these things. So, yeah, it's definitely a universal problem. So, we'll see how the reduced things work. Go ahead.
Color Coral did bring up, we brought this up earlier when we were talking about LCK. We referenced the letter that they wrote, but yeah, Arnold does talk about how like and Gen.G is like an incredibly successful team, right? Domestically and now internationally. And yeah, that is true. Like he's been actually pretty open about how much it costs to run a league team and how a lot of times they'll be operating at a loss.
And one thing we haven't even touched on, which is this idea that high viewership automatically translates to revenue, which it does not.
Is not true.
You have to be able to monetize that in some way. And we did talk about broadcasting rights briefly. But sponsorships has traditionally been the esports method of doing it. And I don't mind saying that that the general average percentage of sponsorship, of revenue from sponsorship is like over 70% for most orgs. And when sponsors suddenly left the ecosystem, that is huge, right? That's like very big. Like at the end of last year, sponsors, like a lot of sponsorship contracts went up and decided not to renew. And that's a big part of why we're on struggle street right now. So yeah, if we're not able to monetize in some way, you monetize it by running 8 ads in a block. Look, it works better for LPL co-streaming, okay? That's why I have it set up that way, because then all of my ads run between games. And you guys just have to deal with it, accept it. I'm sorry. I tried to summarize Emily's points. We will, you can watch the VOD. Next.
It's okay, I ramble anyway.
It's all good. All right. I think the we can finally move on from this, unless you have any final words.
I mean, yeah, like there's obviously a lot more. I'm sure we'll be talking about this a lot.
Luckily, we have an entire split to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll be speculating about it a lot too. The main reason why we can't make this, 3 hours long is because I actually have to do other work related to LCS. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about FPX. Woo!
Woo! Another great topic.
Do you want to summarize it? You can go ahead. I did most of the summaries before, so.
Yeah, so basically, it came out that their top laner, Xiao Laohu, had essentially an altercation with one of their managers. It is a really sad, like, I don't even know how to summarize it, because like it's not difficult to talk about, but like basically the big things for me are that it's definitely a management versus player dispute, where it's, from my perspective, very one-sided in the favor of the players. And I thought it said a lot that everyone on the team was like, we will support you, to Xiaolahu. And we're like, we're on your side. We will vouch for you if they try to like smear your name, everything else. And it turns out there was a lot of individual things. I'd go to, I think you on Twitter was translating a lot of these things. I think also LOL Context Chan also translated a bunch of these or posted translations. But basically, it is a another manager to player dispute, where management, in my opinion, is in the wrong, the player is in the right. And it's gotten to the point where it's so bad that the funniest thing that came out of this was that people were suddenly praising the TES manager for doing the bare minimum of like, look, he found his players good contracts afterwards, and he like didn't screw them over, and he managed to sign these players to to such and such, and it's like, wow, people are praising him for doing like the bare minimum of what a League of Legends manager should do, right, for a team, right? That's where we're at right now. It's really sad because if you followed FPX at all, you know that this is a team full of like young prospects, Xiaolahu included, and they had a really strong breakout split thanks to Milky Way coming over to the team on loan from RNG. And recently they just lost 0-2 to EDG, where FPX had the audacity / whatever to then start Xiaolahu in game 2. I'm not sure if I've done a really good job summarizing that, but it's basically like another case of players being treated poorly by management that has really blown up. And
Yeah.
I hope it gets solved, because I feel bad for Xiaolahu. I feel bad for the rest of this team. I think this is such a talented team. It's really, really frustrating to see that something like this would completely halt any momentum that they were able to make. It makes me really angry talking about it, as you can probably tell from the tone of my voice. And this isn't the first time I've seen this happen. Sadly, I have no faith that it will be the last time either.
Yeah, I think the one caveat is the reasoning why the substitution happened is because the plan was to start Xiaolahu all along, but because of the altercation and him leaving, they put the sub in, and then they didn't have time to change the starting lineup when he came back, and they resolved it. So they put him in for the second one. So that was pre-planned. However, when he was on stage, he did not look happy.
No.
He did not look happy to be there at all. I think he played pretty well, at least in lane. Like, he had a massive lead, and TF kind of died twice and then had to go bots one time. And then went bot because he couldn't lane anymore, and then got even more behind. So he got pretty ahead. So I think that, but FPX just completely disintegrated. The players ended up in a situation where, I mean, I will say, like, FPX is in a really awkward situation gameplay-wise anyway, but this no doubt probably added to the fact that they didn't play well. They probably had no prep time, considering they weren't sure which top laner would start, and my understanding is, like, as is standard procedure, when you have these types of situations, like, all of the individual players had to be interviewed by management, and I heard those interviews were not exactly copacetic. So yeah, it's definitely, like, normally when there's a lot of drama around an org for financial reasons or whatever, people speculate that this causes the team to perform more. It's usually the players don't give a fuck. But if it is directly affecting the players, like something like this, of course it will impact performance 100%. So
yeah. And I also think it's really telling that, like, not only did you have current players, so like there were chats from, I believe, Care and Milky Way that were leaked where they directly messaged Xiaolahu and they were like, we support you, like, we will, obviously, like, vouch for you on your behalf. But then you also had FPX players like Moyan, I think, was the big one, former FPX jungler, talking about this same member of management and being like, yeah, it's not great. So yeah, it is always super, super frustrating when something like this happens.
And then his post and Xiaolahu's initial post getting deleted.
Yep.
And then Xiaolahu coming out with a post that was from a new location and totally him. Yeah, it's but it is definitely one of those things where, like, in these types of situations, management is going to have an automatic power dynamic advantage, right? So it is very unfortunate because allegedly he does have a history of abuse cases, and he's still somehow with the organization, and the fans, to their credit, are heavily protesting the situation, but we'll see what happens.
There was actually an active protest outside of their game that they played against EDG, with like a bunch of fans brought a giant banner and they were like actively protesting FPX management.
But it has actually caused like a very interesting phenomenon on Weibo where people are now heavily praising the TES manager.
Yep.
Because
for doing his job.
I mean, for doing his job, but also like a good, strong reputation for player relations. Like almost every TES player that they let go does end up in a better position. Things like this, or not a better position, but on another org. I mean, people joke that UP is basically TES Academy. They have Niket, they have Qingtian, they have like a bunch of players that were previously on TES. So, yeah, there's a lot of like XTES players that don't really get jailed. So, and then of course like he's always considered friendly to them and things like that. So it is very hard to be a good manager at esports sometimes, according to the stories. But I don't know why. But yeah, doing his job, hooray! Anyway,
good for him.
Drama.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing. Oh my god, what was I gonna say? Now it's like out of my head because I got distracted by praising the TES manager. I'm just mad that this is happening to FPX. Oh, you know what I was gonna bring up was the this isn't the first incident that's even happened this year. Yao Yao from TT spoke out against TT management, and suddenly he got eventually got banned from LPL. And so now people are also not investigating, but like fans are also using that as like a, hey, like, can we do something about managers that are in these positions of power over players, because it's really not fair if players are consistently getting abused on teams. That is, I can't believe I have to say this, but that's not okay.
I think Panda C made some kind of expose. It wasn't necessarily explicitly targeted at managers, but definitely like the way he's experienced the LPL ecosystem, things like that. So a lot of these things have been coming out. So I'm glad that the players are at least able to speak out to an extent. Of course, in 2 or 3 cases, it feels like they're getting punished for it. Panda C got a new team, so you know he didn't, but kind of in response to his post. But he also didn't like directly blame single people. So yeah, it's a little unfortunate, but I'm glad that they're at least coming out a little bit, and hopefully support will increase and we'll see some changes to how things are run. Obviously, there have been a lot of allegations to like poor or improper management over the years that haven't really gained as much public sympathy or uproar. So I'm hoping that this like kind of comes to a head and the environments improve. I know that there was a lot of cases in the past where like players in dev teams were put in poor situations, poor conditions. So we'll see what happens going forward.
Yeah. I think this coupled with the Yao Yao thing, hopefully at the very least, the big difference I've seen is that fan sentiment is actually like, not that fan sentiment wasn't on the side of the players already, but again, because FPX did have such a breakout split, because this team as a whole worked so well together as a unit, even with Milky Way being the star of it, I think people are really, really behind the players in that situation. And a lot of times, whenever something does change, it's because fan sentiment is so one-sided in a specific direction that they can actually enact change. So hopefully that will be able to happen here. Because like you said, this isn't a new thing. But at the very least, this time, maybe because of how vocal fans have been in support of the FPX players, and obviously specifically Shallow, hopefully something will actually come of it.
Yeah, the other thing was Cube like rage quit OMG, but apparently that's just like a funny thing that happened, and there wasn't any abuse cases, but he just kind of left. They let him leave. I guess he was mad after one of their more recent losses that his Udyr couldn't carry. That's my narrative. That's not true. And then he left, and they sent Harry. So that was like kind of a funny thing. And then the Shallahu thing came out, and it's like, oh shit. So yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Technically, next we had kind of like LPL Fearless takeaways, but I think we talked a lot about Fearless. Unless there's something you want to add.
Yeah, no. I think I mean, I will say there hasn't been as much draft trading as I thought there would be based on so like my only since I didn't watch the True Fearless in LDL, my only experience with Fearless was in NACL where you would just see like teams effectively swap draft because it was like partial Fearless. And that hasn't happened in LPL as much, which has been really nice. I have been really interested to see a lot of the draft adaptations that LPL teams have made. I don't I don't necessarily know if they're being wholly driven by Fearless. Some of the like it's really difficult for me to tell whether it's changes from patch or changes from Fearless. Um, because a lot of these things that LPL teams are highly valuing have been really interesting adaptations that make sense outside of the scope of Fearless itself. Like, for example, if you're going to be playing a lot of AD mids, like if Trist and Corki are going to be as high prio as they are in LPL as mid laners, then you're also going to be trying out stuff like Karthus and Brand for jungle. Because of recent jungle changes and the fact that you can now play like farming AP junglers in tandem with AD pushing AD mids, right? And bot lane has also opened up a bit
Ish.
with not only like ish with you have like some trying out of create AD carries, you have some Zig spot, you have I mean, I guess Ashe was always played as an ADC, but Ashe getting played more as an ADC.
It's just
Zyra jungle is another one.
Varus.
This is your meta.
Being
This is your
hot.
meta Rava because Nidalee is back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Varus is the big one who's just never gonna leave. Apparently. But yeah, I think like again, it's been really interesting to watch LPL drafts, just generally. But I don't know if that's being born of Fearless. I think it's more being born of like patch changes, at least from my opinion.
So I think it's that, but I also think I actually felt like there was a lot of trading because it feels like okay, we're gonna play Triss Corki, and now we're gonna play Corki Triss. Woo! We're gonna ban, and it only changes if you ban it right after you play it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it feels at the moment when I watch. Um, the thing that really bothers me about LPL is that apparently Infinity Edge is fake and not a real item and not buffed and not ludicrously OP and not the best first item you can build on ADC right now. We build it like fourth item. It's just kind of nuts to me. It's just like, I guess, sure, why not? So we're still playing like Varus. We're still playing Lethality Callista. We're still playing these things, and I think maybe my frustration with LPL drafts is more born from that than uh, anything else. The I do like the AP junglers because I think I expected it to take longer for LPL to kind of adapt to the fact that farming like the jungle XP increased so much. I do like the AP junglers, and like you could argue that like the combination of AD items plus AP jungle at the same time, it's like a chicken or the egg scenario where it's like what is motivating the other in terms of like the Corki Triss presence and the like Nidalee, Karthus, Lilia Brand presence, right? So yeah, those are interesting, but I also it's like, oh, we're gonna pick first pick Trist again, cool, and that's like one of this why I'm kind of tempted to do another investigation of like how diverse has the LPL draft, how much has diversity in the LPL draft actually increased because of Fearless, and I think that that's like an interesting topic that I might investigate pending time, but otherwise, yeah, unclear.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, actually. Looking through, I still haven't seen a lot of, like, I guess from my perspective, certain picks are being traded, specifically Trist, Corki. But outside of that, I haven't seen it does not feel as stagnant as NACL did to me, where, like, sometimes you would have almost the identical draft just swapped for teams.
Yep. All right. Do we want to keep talking about LPL, or do we want to quickly, before LCS starts, since we only have 20 minutes left,
Oh, yeah.
do our LCS predictions / takeaways / expectations? That's the
Yeah, I guess I
question.
should mention to LCS. I'm on broadcast this week.
That's crazy.
It
Weird.
is.
LCS is a thing that exists, guys. It's still happening. Maybe this will be the last. Someone in chat said that you should make the broadcast theme for the split the last dance. Since
Oh, that's
it's the
interesting.
end of the traditional LCS era, so it's the last one.
People should know that I have literally no power over LCS branding. But yeah, LCS is back this Friday. Apparently, Leo, our stats guy, has a spicy bet with Graham for Dignitas to finish top 3, which is interesting.
I don't understand the big hype. I'm gonna be real, but maybe you can convince me that it exists. Isn't it back Saturday?
Saturday, yeah.
Okay,
Wow.
okay, cool. Just double checking.
I don't know why I said Friday. It is back Saturday.
We
It's
killed
Saturday, Sunday.
Super Weeks, Emily. Didn't you see the
I know. Wow.
They're
Yeah,
dead.
I just listened to. I need to listen to Mark more.
It only took like how many years to kill a thing that was obviously bad for the format?
God.
Yay!
All right. You know what I'm excited about? Guess who's starting jungler for Shopify Rebellion? Tomio. Actually, I'm really excited about Tomio. Yeah, I think it is a solid meta for him. You know, I think he's going to be really, really different from Boogie in terms of like the way that both junglers play. So, I'm very curious to see how that shakes out. I don't know how you want to approach this. I feel like I've already talked at length about C9 and how Thanatos will fit in. We had like a whole section on that. It just happened like a month and a half ago because they already made that change over MSI. But if people want to summarize my thoughts, I think Thanatos is pretty good. I also expect them to play around him exactly like they would have played around Fudge, like his first split in particular. Like I see that happening a lot, especially since I think the jungle changes. Blabber is going to be really, really comfortable on a lot of these farming junglers. And I think it's actually their gameplay might look very similar to what you saw from C9 during Fudge's first split, where they're going to be stacking top wave and potentially trying to dive top and putting Thanatos on something that he'll like be really comfortable on and lean. But we'll see. That was my outlook for C9 in like a really quick summary of it. Dig, there are a lot of players that I like want to see be successful just because I like them. Sven in particular, like I really, really respect his ideas towards the game. And I'm curious to see him step back in the ADC position. But I don't really know where this team is going to fit in terms of gameplay. Like, we kind of already talked about FlyQuest too, right? Like, I feel like we've talked about a lot of the roster
most of the rosters. I guess for me, because I haven't made you like commit to who are your top 3 teams going to the last Worlds that NA gets 3 slots in. Let's go.
This is going to be a boring answer because I already said this in another interview with the caveat that like my flaw as an analyst is that I kind of always go based on like the most stable, I guess, like expected result. So I'm still going TL C9 FlyQuest, with FlyQuest being the bigger question mark, interestingly enough, for me than C9. And then teams that might be able to break into that top 3. So like those are the 3 teams that I expect to see at Worlds. Teams that could break into that top 3. I still would love to see this NRG team do well. I really like the players on this team. I know that they had issues with fitting Puhi's idea of like how to play the game with the rest of the team. In particular, Palafox. So I'm hoping that they have, like, with the time off to kind of gel more as a team, they've come to a better, either a better communication setup, or they've been able to really work on seeing eye to eye as to how the game was played. Again, this is all public. This is something their players have said publicly. But I have such a soft spot in my heart for this team that I like really want to see them succeed. So I would love it if they could like jump into that spot. I do think it's interesting how they're being immediately rated now, like below Dig, potentially below 100 Thieves, because it's just interesting that they won like one championship, and even then people were not necessarily believing they were the best team in NA. And then they have one like kind of rough split, and then now they're back like towards the bottom of the standings. A lot of things I've seen, which is kind of interesting to me, how people still somewhat underrate the players on this roster, even with lackluster performances this spring. That would be the team that I'd want to see kind of sneak in there for me, but that's just my own personal bias.
All right. So, my lock top 2, I think, are still going to be TL Fly. I don't think that changes. I am lower on C9 than a lot of people because I'm lower on Thanatos, and I think their problems don't get fixed by Thanatos. It's possible Reaper fixes them, but I think the system of the team is difficult. So we'll see. Here's my spicy take. Halfway through the split, NRG decides, fuck it, we're getting Surdy. And Surdy wins NACL, CBLoL, LCS, and Worlds. Okay.
Wow, I don't know about Worlds, but that'd be an insane run
it
for
would be an insane
for
run,
him,
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think Surdy gives them an identity, and I think it's like a very clear roster change that I would make. And no shade to Dokla. I think he had a really difficult spring. I hope he bounces back, like deep down. But I also think it's a crime that Surdy's not in LCS, and to me, it makes perfect sense for Surdy to be on NRG because I think stylistically it just is very good fit. So, yeah, we'll see. It's interesting, for sure. But like that's my spicy read. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I know there's like I have to ask. Okay, this is the important question. How dig pilled are you?
Super dig pilled. I won't be surprised if they like rip off a series of games, but I'm not sure. Like, especially when I see a team, even with players that I really like, right? With older players who are typically very set in the way that they want to play things. And specifically 2 players coming onto this roster who took a split off, not purposefully, but like they didn't play for a split. I don't know how this team is going to work. And I know it's a cop out to be like, because they have a lot of older veteran players, they might have communication issues, but like it goes beyond that a bit for me, just because again, I do respect the players on this roster, but I also do think that they have like very clear-cut ideas of the way that they want to play the game, and I don't know if they're going to be able to gel together like that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, and Spica also didn't play last split. Yep. So 3 of your players have been off for a split.
I also think another common misconception is experience equals leadership. Because knowing what I do about these players, I look at their roster and I'm actually just actively asking like who is leading the team. I think most people think Ben because he's well spoken, but generally speaking, my understanding is he doesn't necessarily provide like the entire map's view of what's happening while in game. He gives direction early game, and that was like a thing that he did a lot on C9. But I'm that's like my biggest question about this team, 100%. So I'm not as dick pilled. I also
especially
yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, especially with him returning to, because like I wouldn't be surprised if he was more vocal as a support maybe earlier in the game than maybe he had been previously on teams as an ADC. But moving back into the AD position, you would be expecting you'd be expecting primarily Spica to probably be taking control of their early game. If not, like maybe Isles is calling stuff in that lane, but like I still see Sven's approach to laning probably taking over on bot side, but I don't know how vocal he'd be about their overall early game and their map because he's going to be an AD carry and not a support.
So one of my favorite examples of this, because bringing up in chat, someone commented that Sven is apparently very. Liquor said Sven is very vocal, but Sven is also not vocality also is not leadership. I think the perfect example that I love to give is in T1 there's this big misconception that Marin was a massive shot caller in like 2015, I think was the year. There was this big misconception that Marin was a massive shot caller because he talked a lot, but actually asking like what he was saying or what he was contributing to the calls, it was literally like mostly gank top over and over again on repeat. So that's not necessarily giving you a whole lot that you need. So yeah, I think that that's definitely a big thing to take into account as well, as that like vocality also doesn't equal leadership. But I mean, apparently Liquor said that Sven has changed a lot since he played with him last, so in terms of like his ability to be vocal, so maybe that does give them something. So
yeah,
according to sorry, I just want to shout out the person in chat that made the comment. I could find it, my bad. Oh, I can cast. There you go. Thank you.
oh nice. Yeah, probably from the recent Licorice interview, I would assume that went out.
Yep. So yeah. I think we should kind of wrap up. Real unless you have something
I was gonna
else.
say, that being said,
Yeah.
LCS is gonna be exciting because I actually think that every single team you can see a path to victory for them. And also in best of threes, I'm really curious to see how teams adapt and draft. So yeah, I'm super excited for LCS split to start. I hope that the recent news doesn't overshadow like the excitement that can be around the LCS, because again, I think best of threes are going to be really fun. There's a lot of stuff you can take, and like as a storyteller on broadcast, like I like best of series better because like draft in and of itself and then how the players match up tell a story through that little best of. So yeah, you should get excited because again, like I think there are conditions of victory for every single team and every single roster in LCS once again. I hope we have a lot of parity. I hope it's a banger. Get excited.
Woo. Yeah, I mean, I also
Or don't,
do
I guess.
hope that there isn't like a Riot internal ban on talking about the upcoming changes on the broadcast for you guys, because I think it would be fun to lean into this is the last like traditional
Same.
LCS run, and I think you could definitely do a lot with it, like speculating on like the teams and the players that can make a name for themselves now and like guarantee that they find a place next year, stuff like that. So yeah, that'll be interesting. Before I let you go, I made a coffee account. For those of you who don't know what coffee is, it is a Patreon, except that it gives us more of a share of what you give us than Patreon does. That's why I chose this. I actually did the research. So there is a specific tier. This is going to be my Ko-fi, but there is a specific tier for supporting Making the Rounds. So if you don't care about me and you just care about the show, and you only want to support the show, you can do a $3 subscription, and I will split the $3 subscriptions with Emily as soon as she gives me her PayPal, which she still hasn't given me. And and
Do that.
please feel free to sign up for the coffee account and support the show. Your contributions will mean a lot, and it's esports winter. We're downsizing. We're losing teams left and right. We're losing personalities left and right. I swear, every time I check my Twitter, people are retiring and leaving the space. So,
True.
would appreciate it if you've enjoyed the content to support the coffee account. So, thanks everyone. Anyway, watch Emily Rand this weekend on the LCS broadcast. Having a good time, doing a great.
I might even be casting.
Oh,
Crazy.
fun.